So, welcome everyone to episode number 42 of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. Today we have a pretty funny episode. It is entitled, Don't Ice Fish Like a Fool. Have you ever done that, Andrew?
Every day I've been alive and it's winter time.
So, I thought today we could actually cover some tips and tricks on helping you ice fish more safely, as well as some techniques that might help you catch more fish this winter. But before we start, I would like to say another special thanks to our buddy Ted Williams and Oracle Studios for that awesome, super cool intro that he did for us. Just so you know, Ted, we've had many people message us and say how much they really love the new intro. So thanks again for
Half
that.
of those are me just messaging Jesse every time I listen to it. I'm like, Jesse, that guy was amazing.
So that's why we have so many views this month. So anyway, before we start, as usual, we have our traditional interesting fishing fact. And to handle that, the man with the increasingly larger growing mustache, Andrew.
It's migrating across the rest of my face. So this has been in the works since last year. I was going to do this one last year, and like, you know what? I'm not going to rush it. And I did a bit more research, and I wanted to make sure I did it. It's true justice. So there's a couple questions for you, Jesse, in amongst this. But have you ever heard of the wavy-rayed lampmussel?
Of course I have. Obviously not.
Isn't it your favorite species in Ontario?
If I knew it existed, maybe.
So I'll describe it here briefly. It's a medium-sized freshwater mussel. About 10 centimeters in length is its maximum growth. They can live up to 20 years. And they're yellow or yellowish-green rounded shell. And they have thin, wavy green lines that are radiating outward from the center of that shell. They are found in medium to small-sized rivers, usually clear water. So they're even like Lake St. Clair and stuff like that. The rivers flowing in, they have like the St. Clair River. That is some of their native habitat. Is kind of that section of Ontario, and down into the States a bit. Now, what's the burning question on your mind right now about these mussels?
I have no idea.
How do they reproduce?
Oh, that wasn't the first thing I was thinking of. That was the second thing I was thinking of.
Okay, yeah. So, first of all, mussels in general. Have you ever heard about how they actually, like fish, we know they spawn. You know, we as humans do different things. But as a clam or as mussels, how do mussels reproduce? Like, I remember watching BBC or Blue Planet, and it's about like corals, and they have all the sperm go out, float in the eggs, and it just like mixes in the ocean, and they do it at the same time. And like, is that similar? So there's a couple different methods. So one of the most common ones is the female mussels. They'll lay eggs and keep them in the shell. They brood them in a special chamber in their gills. The males will then release sperm into the water, and the females will siphon in water constantly, so that they would eventually pull in some random sperm that's flowing downstream. It fertilizes the eggs, and then they start to grow inside that clam. Some of them, again, the females will then just expel all these young mussel larvae, and they have to. The really cool thing about it is they're actually parasites. Mussel larvae are parasites, and they have to attach to a host fish on their gills in order to then grow to be juvenile mussels, and they just drop off, and now they've been scattered and spread around. So that's the one method, is the females just kind of release them and hope that a fish randomly swims into it. Another method that they'll use is that some species will use is they'll kind of have this big clump that looks like something floating downstream, and they expect like a fish to come up and eat it. And then that fish eats it because this big burst of these essentially little parasitic mussel larvae, and they're known as Glochida. Or Glochidia, I don't know, something weird. It's a weird name. I'm just going to say larva.
Gross.
Now, the wavy-rayed lamp mussel is very special. So the females, they actually target specific fish to be the hosts for the larva. Do you know how they do that? or
Scent?
give me your best guess as to how they would do that.
Is it by scent?
Incorrect. It's actually by sight.
Oh.
So like, how does this mussel do this? So a they have an extension of the mantle tissue that's inside of them that resembles a small fish, and they push that outside of their shell and they twitch it, and it looks like a minnow. And so it's like a small lure essentially, and it expects, and most of the time it's a smallmouth or largemouth bass will come up and it goes to eat this minnow essentially that it thinks it's grabbing. When it does so, and you know how bass, when they eat, they have this big suction, right? So that suction actually bursts it ruptures the gills in the mussel. So all these larvae are instantly released into that fish's mouth and flows right over top of the gills, and they just clamp onto the gills. And they'll hold there until they grow up enough, and they'll drop off. Usually, within either sometimes a few days or a few weeks. So I'm just thinking, imagine the 3 different versions of how mussels like have to reproduce and how these young are. Imagine if you were like driving a boat and you swallow a bug, like just randomly. It's like, okay, like, yeah, that happens. That's like the one method where they just kind of release it all into the water and hope a fish swims by. But what about the one that leaves like a big clump of them? It's like you're eating a burger, but then you find out like, oh wait, this is made of the cricket proteins. Like, this is disgusting. But then the worst of all is you're like, oh, look at this. It's a perfect apple on a tree, and you pick it off and you take a bite, and it just explodes, and like a bunch of like bugs fly into your mouth and like latch onto your lungs. That's these poor bass. That's what happens to these guys.
Hey,
when they
this
start
is supposed to
attacking
be called interesting fishing fact, not terrifying fishing fact.
But that is the very interesting, I think, an exciting way that the wavy-rayed lamp mussel reproduces.
That is terrifying. If you're a fish, I guess. And the cool thing is that is something
it doesn't
that
harm
can be
the fish,
found
which is
in
good.
Ontario.
Yeah.
So
yeah, which is weird. Like when I first heard of it, I was like, that
sounds like something that would be like in the Amazon, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But
that's
yeah,
crazy.
it's local to Ontario, and yeah, like there's cool. I never realized that the small larval state of them was actually like a parasite. They had to latch onto the fish gills, but thankfully it doesn't hurt the fish at all. So it's not a deterrent for them at all, or a downside.
That was actually very interesting. I'm going to give you the first interesting fishing fact rating of 2024, and I'm going to give you a big juicy A+.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well done.
Big juicy, like some clam babies.
So
mussels aren't clams.
Before we get into our main topic, we would just like to thank everyone who has recently written us a review. If you listen to this on Apple Podcasts and you can actually type out and write us a review, that would be amazing. We're trying to get our reviews up. They're already amazing. We're trying to get a lot more. And if you're on Spotify, make sure to give us a star rating. And if you're on YouTube, just make sure that you give us a thumbs up on our video as well. For this week's giveaway partner, we've actually paired up with Limestone Lures. Now, Jeff at Limestone Lures, we met at CanCast last year. We're actually excited to see him again there at CanCast this year in April. And he is a really cool guy, makes tons of cool baits. He lives out in Kingston. We have a lot of his baits in our regular rotation throughout the year. He actually has started making a lot of really cool ice fishing baits. So we're actually going to have a giveaway for that. We're going to talk a little bit more about that coming soon throughout the episode. But keep that in mind for this cool episode giveaway. So the episode is called Don't Ice Fish Like a Fool. And like Andrew said, like we've all probably done some pretty dumb things when we're ice fishing. And because ice fishing is inherently, could be dangerous, you could say, there are a lot of mistakes that you can make. We're going to talk about some safety mistakes. We're also going to talk about some mistakes that we might do when we're actually fishing. And if these are mistakes that we've made ourselves, so we can tell you what we've learned over the years fishing, so that we can show you what success we've had by overcoming our stupidity, so to say. So the first point we're going to talk about is safety. And then we're talking about mistakes that you could make, mistakes that we've made. One of the first things when I think of ice fishing, and we're all probably doing it right now in the last few weeks, is we're looking at ice reports. Have you been looking at them, Andrew?
I've been trying to keep up to date on them. Absolutely. Yeah, it's tough to know sometimes exactly where to look to get the accurate ones.
Yeah. Now, where I usually look is, again, we have a lot of friends that, we ice fish with, or we know from Instagram or other places, and they will be happy to tell you generally when the ice is safe. And some of these guys and girls actually post ice fishing reports on social media or on YouTube. There's also a lot of like ice fishing operators, like say on Lake Simcoe or other lakes, that will go out and show you almost daily the ice reports. So if you're someone like me and Andrew that don't live close by a lake where we can't just be like, you know what, I'll drive down and see how the ice is today, you're going to really rely on these ice reports and generally take them with a grain of salt. Something that is safe, one day, the next day, it could be a totally different story. So don't use ice reports as like, the gold standard of like safety, but use them to kind of judge how the ice is. Like right now, we're looking to get out this weekend. We've been looking at some ice reports. And if we're hearing like, oh, the ice is only 2.5 inches, 3 inches, we might wait till next weekend.
Mm-hmm.
But from the ice reports that we've read and we've seen, we know the ice is thicker than that. So using logic and talking to a bunch of people, we know that it's safe to go out this weekend where we're going to go. So that is definitely one thing, especially if you're new to ice fishing, definitely check out the ice reports on the lake. It's better to, find these things out before you drive up to the lake and find out that, either there's no ice or very sketchy ice that you can't go fishing on, especially if you're driving for hours. That would be terrible.
Yeah.
Now, what would you say is like the second piece of equipment that like anyone, a beginner, an expert ice angler should have in their arsenal?
So especially for either early or late ice, anytime when the weather changes where it warms up a lot, a spud bar is a must-have, I would say, on the ice.
Do you have one?
I don't, but I will borrow yours. I'm going without you.
I have two now, and it's one of those things that everyone that you talk to that is an experienced ice angler, like we had on Drew from DC Hooked Angling Fishing Guide last week on the podcast. If you haven't heard that episode yet, I really recommend that you do. It's a great episode. And one thing that he said multiple times throughout the episode is you need a spud bar. He said a spud bar is your best friend on the ice. Even if you go fishing with your buddy, the spud bar is your best friend, not your best friend. So why, I know we explained it a little last week, Andrew, but what is the proper way to use a spud bar compared to maybe some of the mistakes you see people using a spud bar?
So I'll say one of the don'ts that I see a lot is people will walk out, they'll go to the edge of the ice, they'll jab a couple times lightly at the ice and like, oh, it hasn't gone through, and they'll just start walking out, and they walk another 50 feet and they stab again. And the purpose of the spud bar is to make sure your next step is safe. It's like every time you're moving like 2 feet forward, you're hacking at that ice, making sure it's safe, because underwater currents, they can change what looks like flat, solid ice where it should be all 4 inches thick the whole way across. If there's an underwater spring there, or if there's a creek mouth that's coming over and there's an underwater trench and there's maybe warmer water coming up from underneath still, you are going to have all of a sudden like slush or 1 inch of ice or something, and that spud bar is going to go right through. So you can check your step ahead of you as you make your way out onto the ice. So it's a lot of work, but
yeah. So like you said, I see a lot of people, oftentimes you'll watch YouTube videos or whatever, people ice fishing, and they're kind of like stabbing it as they walk beside them. A spud bar is supposed to tell you the ice in front of you is safe. So you should be, especially on, like Andrew said, early ice or late ice when the ice is possibly sketchy, you should be spudding ahead of you as you walk forward cautiously. So that is one thing. And again, spud bars they're not cheap, but they're not expensive. And if again, if you're ice fishing, spending $50, I think the spud bar that I bought a few years ago was only like $40.
Mm-hmm. You can get them on sale sometimes. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you can get the fancy ones that are 2-piece that are like over $100, but you can get one for $50, and that $50 will last you forever unless you drop it down through the ice, which you shouldn't. But you should have that thing for years and years. So I think the one that I had, I picked it up at Gagnon Sports for like $40, and it was just like a basic model one. And what's going to go wrong with it? It's literally just a steel pipe with a chisel head on the end. So if you don't have a spud bar or a buddy that's fishing with you that has a spud bar, you should definitely get one because it can save your life.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen some guys, they'll make their own too. It's like some 3/4 inch rebar, and they would just weld like this big metal blade to the front. It's like, you know what? It's better than nothing. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, if you got the metal and you know how to weld, build one yourself. They're not complicated devices.
But pretty, trying to use a fiberglass reflector for the end of your driveway, and that's going to do nothing. Like, it has to have the weight so that it can actually, your purpose of it is you're trying to push that through the ice. Your hope is that it doesn't go through, but your goal is to try and push it to the ice every time.
Yeah. And another thing too is become familiar with how a spud bar works. So like if you hit the ice once and it goes through, that ice isn't safe. If you have to hit the ice 3 times, 4 times in the same spot before it breaks through, that ice is safer that you can walk on. So you have to know, and it comes from experience, how many hits you have to hit the same spot in the ice before it breaks through that makes it safe ice. Again, if you're walking out and you hit one hit and water starts coming up, that's not safe ice. So you really have to have experience. Again, talk to someone like we talked to Drew last week. That guy's probably on the ice more than, we have in our whole life in like 1 year. Because the guy like lives out there. It's like an ice hermit. But like talk to people that have more experience. Go fishing with a guide. Go fishing with a buddy that has more experience. And you can pick these things up pretty quick. And again, it can save your life. So that's one thing. And I know we kind of talked about inconsistent ice. Like Andrew was saying, you could be walking. And I know this has happened to us. We'll be spudding out. And you're like, this ice is like 7-8 inches. This is fine. No problem. Then all of a sudden you hit a spot that has 2.5-3 inches. Mm-hmm. And you could have been like just walking through and not paid any attention. And all of a sudden you hit this spot with slush and poof, you go straight in.
Especially on really larger lakes. Yeah, on larger lakes especially. Like, I remember fishing Lake Simcoe, and we drill a hole beside a pressure crack, and it would be maybe 2 inches wide. And then 6 hours later, it would be 2 feet wide or 4 feet wide. And what will happen is if that pressure crack opens up and then freezes, it's still only going to have, it's open water below it. It's not going to be the 2 feet thick of ice that the rest of the lake is. It's going to be 1 inch thick or 2 inches thick. But from the top, especially if it snows on top, you will have no way of distinguishing that was a pressure crack before.
Yeah, especially if it snows on top. Yeah, so really, you really have to, be careful when you're out there because ice, like they said, there's no such thing as safe ice. Ice can change very quickly, especially on big water, like Andrew said, especially in areas that have some sort of current on them too. Mm-hmm. So if you're not familiar, it's better to be safe than sorry and not go out or go with someone that knows the lake very well. So the next thing I've heard a lot is, especially early and late in the season, a lot of people will ask, like, is it safe to go ice fishing by yourself? What do you say, Andrew?
I would say it's not as safe as going with someone else. You can do dangerous things smartly, but it's safer to have a buddy with you. And be spread out. Don't stand side by side or else it does nothing. It increases your weight load. But if you're spread out, by 10, 15 feet apart, that will have someone there who can assist in case there's an emergency.
Yeah. And I know, like, especially early ice, for me anyway, I won't go out by myself until there's 6 inches. Mm-hmm. Consistently 6 inches. I'm not going to go out. I know guys will go out in 3 inches of ice. Don't do that by yourself, because if you do fall in, because your chance of falling in on 3 inches ice is way higher than on 6 inches ice. You do not want to be by yourself out there. I'm not saying you can't get out. I'm not saying you won't be able to make it back to shore and get warm, but the odds of that happening are significantly less than if you were with someone that can help you or call for help at least. So my advice would be, especially if you're not experienced, do not go out by yourself until there's fairly thick ice or there's other people around. Don't go out in some random back lake in the middle of nowhere by yourself. Bad things can happen.
Yeah. And not telling when where you're going and all that stuff. Yeah.
And even experienced anglers. Yeah. One thing I do say is whenever I fish by myself, usually by February when there's lots of ice, I always tell someone where I'm going fishing. I'll send them a GPS pin if there's, cellular. and I'll tell them when to expect to hear a call from me. Again, I tell my wife because I'm
Mhm.
married, but maybe you can tell someone else if you're not.
Yeah.
So if you
Even
do,
fishing in the summer, all that stuff too. But
yeah,
winter ice fishing, the dangers all get amped up. Everything
yeah,
is it becomes more dangerous.
make
The
sure
chance of your
someone is
boat breaking in
expecting you.
half, yeah, the chance of your boat breaking in half and you falling in is pretty slim. The chance of that ice underneath your feet, you stepping in the wrong spot and falling in, is fairly high.
True. So I know people say, especially if you're inexperienced, that you shouldn't do this, but even experienced people
Hmm.
end up passing away on ice fishing accidents. Like I know we had a few years ago, we had a guy that went out by himself and he died. He went under the ice. He couldn't get out because he
Yep.
was by himself, you know? So these things happen. It's not something you want to think about, but it's something that you want to think about to be like, that happened to a very experienced angler. It could happen to me. Be safe, go with a buddy, have a spud bar, have the safety equipment. That's the next point we're going to cover is safety equipment. And the first point I'll cover is a float suit. Now, I know, and I was in this position for many years, a float suit is really expensive. Like you're going to spend at least, five, six, seven, $800 on a float suit minimum. And I know like the best time to buy a float suit is at the end of winter when they go on clearance.
Yep.
But that's usually you're like, you know what, I'll just get through this year and I'll buy one in the spring. And then spring comes along and you forget to buy one. What happened a few years ago is my wife, she's always nervous when I go ice fishing because I used to go by myself because I had, a day off during the week and all my buddies worked during the week and I would go out by myself on thick ice. And she was always nervous. So she ended up buying me a float suit. And I think it was like $700-800 at the time, which I get. That's very expensive, especially if you don't ice fish regularly.
Hmm.
But think of it this way. You're buying a float suit, which is, if you don't know, it's an ice fishing, bib, like super warm, and a really super warm winter coat, but it has built-in flotation. So if you do fall in, it keeps you afloat, just like the name. It's a float suit.
And it doesn't retain water. So if you're wearing a down jacket, yeah, that's super warm. But if that gets wet, it holds all that water. The
Yeah.
float suits don't.
Yeah. So it's not pleasant to fall in the ice. I've never done it, thank goodness. But if you're wearing a float suit, it increases your chances of getting out. I'm not saying that float suits are perfect, that every time you fall in, you'll be 100% fine, just like, oh, this is okay, I'm in a float suit. It's still terrifying
Yeah.
to fall in. Now, float suits, like we said, they're expensive. And I get it. If you're a normal person, especially in this economy, spending $800 on a float suit, it may not even be possible. But if you can afford one or save up for one, save up a few bucks every month. So next year you can get one. They're really good quality. It'll last you years and years and years. Like
Hmm.
the one I have, I got a Striker Climate, which is one of Striker's like higher end float suits. The thing's fantastic. Like it's so warm, it's ridiculous. Like the bib, it's so tough. I can just like fish on my knees. Like outside, if I drill a hole outside, fish on my knees. It's like this thick of padding. So warm. You're just like, when you're ice fishing and it's like, oh man, I'm freezing. Never in that suit. I'm taking the jacket off and the liner inside is super warm too. So if you can get one, I highly recommend it. I know they're expensive. And even Andrew doesn't have one. And every
No,
year I'm like,
I'm
you
actually
got to get
saving
one
up
of
for one
these.
this year.
Yeah,
That's
you
the
got to
plan,
get
so.
one.
Yeah.
And again, like I said, I recommend because I've worked at 2 tackle shops.
I make
Check
Jesse
out.
walk in front of me, so he's more likely to
Yeah.
fall through than me.
If I fall in, he'll jump on top of me. But my recommendation would be check out sales at the kind of like midwinter even, because you have to think like the fishing stores are already like their ice fishing stuff's already on clearance. Like right now, I got an email from Gagnon Sports and it was like ice fishing clearance.
Yeah.
It's the second week of January.
They need to free up space to get prepped for
Yeah.
steelhead coming in.
And guess what? Right now, a lot of their float suits right now are like on a big discount right now, even. So definitely check that out. I know Cabela's has some good sales sometimes. Gagnon's does. A sale oftentimes has some good suits you can get, but if you can get one, it's an investment in your safety, but it's also super warm. So it's really just like a good all around purchase, I would say.
Yeah.
But again, we went for years without having one, but now that I have one, it just gives me that extra peace of mind that I know if something terrible did happen, it wouldn't
You're
be
better
as
prepared.
terrible. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And they look sick. You look like a rock star out
You
on the
look
water. You're
legit.
just like walking around like, da-da-da. Even if you don't catch fish, you're just like, whatever, I'm good.
The other thing I'd say is very important is to have ice picks. Now, a funny story, I got my first ice picks. Now, I'm not talking like ice climbing picks. These are generally, they're on a string, and you can kind of run it right between your two, like through your sleeves of your coat, so that they're accessible at your hands. Or you can have it just wrapped around your neck, and they kind of clip together as in a modern style. My first set
Yep.
I got like way back when, and yeah, it was just on, um, remember idiot mittens? You pull one string and you smack yourself with the other because it went through your coat. That's one of the ways you can have your ice picks. They're handy. They're right at your hands. It's not going to just fall out of your coat.
Yep.
But the newer ones, they kind of clip together nicely and hang around your neck. Now, I found those on the ice. Now, I don't know if that's a good thing. Someone lost theirs. I hope they got new ones, but I'm hoping that it was just something that was left behind and not, a bad example of, boy, I should have this threaded through my coat sleeves. But but they're super important. And the way, if you ever fall through the ice, there's even videos of how every single year, like the fire rescue and stuff like that, they will talk about how we get out of the ice, which is important. The picks help a lot because you're supposed to kind of army crawl with your forearm flat against the ice and just pull your body forward. And because your hands are wet, you can kind of freeze them to the ice with your coat sleeves on your way up. Now, if you're holding picks, you can jab yourself into the ice and you get even more traction to pull yourself forward and kind of just bring yourself onto that ice ledge like a seal would come out of a pool or something.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how you get out of the ice. And those picks, if they're accessible, it is a good idea to have them threaded through your coat sleeves because then they're at your hands. You're more likely to make use of them than if you have to, hang around your neck. Oh, let me unclip these and get them ready. And you're in freezing cold water. Your mind is
Yeah.
not working right instantly.
You don't want to leave them in your tackle bag.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I got
Yeah.
picks, but they're in my tackle bag or
Have
in my
them
bucket.
accessible.
Have them on you.
Yeah. And honestly, watch a video that's put out by Ontario Safety and stuff like that on how to get out of the ice if you fall through. The more preparation you have, the better.
Yeah. And I know I've had a few people tell me like, oh, you should go through the ice like in a safe environment just so you know how it feels.
I have.
I'm not going to do that myself. I'm not going to like get everything wet for that. But if, like Andrew said, if you do watch the videos and you have an understanding, I think the main thing is when you first go through the ice is, I know it sounds crazy, but remain calm.
Absolutely.
Don't start freaking out. Remain calm. Give yourself a second to like take a breath and be like, okay, let's do this. And know the procedure of how to get out.
Mm-hmm.
And you should be fine to get out, especially if you're wearing a float suit, like we said. So those are the safety things. Again, heaven forbid you fall through the ice, especially if you're by yourself.
Yeah.
But another thing you can have if you are by yourself, and I just actually got one of these like a few years ago, is a whistle.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of people say you should have one, and I never had one for years. If you're fishing by yourself,
sometimes they're built into the ice picks too.
Yep. I have like, you can just buy one of those like Fox 40 whistles.
Mm-hmm.
They're like $4, $3 even, right? Have that around your neck. If you fall through the ice and you can't get out, or something happens, or you slip on the ice and break your leg, you have a whistle and you can hear a whistle for miles. I forget what this says on the package, but it says you can hear it so far away. Blow the whistle, get someone's attention. That could really save your life or really save you in a bad situation. So that's
a whistle is far louder than yelling and screaming. And you can only yell and scream for so long before your vocal cords give out. So the whistle you can do forever. So the whole time, if you fall through, don't ever feel too that you're like, oh, I can get to safety under my own power now. If you have had a bad experience where you've fallen through, let's say you've gotten out of the ice by yourself, okay, and now you're soaked to the bone. It's minus 15, the wind's blowing, and you need to get to shelter so that you can actually warm up so you don't get hypothermia. Start blowing that whistle. Start looking for help however you can. I don't think there's anyone out there on the ice who's not going to see someone who's, fallen through the ice and won't do anything they can to help that person. I know if I drove 4 hours north to go ice fishing today and I'm excited, and I see some guy on my walk out, I'm like, that guy is soaked. I'm going to do whatever I can to help him right away. Fishing takes the back burner now. His life is more important.
Yeah, for sure. So hopefully that never happens to you guys, but if it does, you should be prepared. So keep that in mind.
Thus
Before we get on to
concludes
our
the
next,
serious topic of our.
yeah, before we get on to our next point, I would like to thank our Patreon members. Our Patreon members donate a few bucks every month to help cover the cost of the show. There are expenses to running this weekly show, and we would like to thank all of our Patreon members. Some of them have been with us for many months, and we did have a lot of people join in the last month. If you have joined just recently, we really, really appreciate it. You help take a lot of the stress away from running the show because, like we said, there are a lot of expenses to running it. It's not just us talking to a microphone. There's lots of subscriptions to different stuff that we have to do to post this and host it and all that stuff. So we do appreciate that. Again, one of the cool things about being a Patreon member this year is what, Andrew?
You get entered into the giveaways automatically.
Yeah. So unlike last year, we let anyone enter the giveaways, but this year we're only letting Patreon members enter into the giveaways. We're going to support those that support the show.
And it's great odds too.
It's pretty good odds.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in entering some of the giveaways that we're going to have multiple times a month, you can do that for only $2 a month. Mm-hmm. So definitely check that out. I have the link below if you'd like to support the show. So again, we're going to talk about one mistake that we've made ice fishing. And it can go either one way or the other. And this has nothing to do with falling through the ice. So all that morbid talk is over. But one thing is, I think a lot of people make this mistake ice fishing, is they either give their bait way too much action, which I think is usually the main flaw, mm-hmm. or not enough action. I know that sounds like, oh, it's either one or the other, but the main one is way too much action. And what I found is I learned a lot. Me and Andrew learned a lot once we got the underwater camera.
Yeah,
right?
That was a game changer.
Like what did you notice? Like
when we saw on a fish finder or something like that before, on other electronics, you could see perhaps, the flasher and you see something come up, or you'd see the fish logo, or you see that hook go close to where your bait is, but you don't. And you don't know what your bait's doing down there. Maybe you see like a small little dot, but you don't know. You're seeing on a screen that's 4 inches big, and you're like, yeah, that's barely moving, and oh, that fish, he came right up to it and then left. As soon as you got the camera and you put your bait down, you realize how much your little jig is moving, or your spoon. When you move the rod, it's like moving double what you think it is. And all these, especially perch, because we only have a short length of the camera line, but we were seeing all these perch were like freaking out. You got all excited to start jigging faster, and every single perch was just turning away. All of them.
Yep. And I mean, we were catching fish, but we started to notice how many fish we weren't catching.
Yeah.
When we had the camera. So like, you'd catch, a bunch of jumbos here, a bunch of dinks there, and then all of a sudden you'd look down the hole and be like, wow, there's a bunch of jumbos. And they would look at your lure, like Andrew said, and just swim away. It's like, well, what's wrong with it? Even they were the smart ones.
When you're looking straight down onto your bait, you still don't see it. And what was shocking is in the camera, we'd get all excited and you start that little tremble, and you'd see that little jig or that minnow, and it's just like quivering. That's enough movement. And we were moving it too much, and you could actually see we were a deterrent to that fish striking.
Yep. I found that especially nowadays with the use of braided line, a lot of people use braided line to a leader because, braid is so thin and it's very sensitive. But the other thing with
fluoro, because fluoro is on that light of weight and stuff, it's not going to move either. It's going to be nice and taut and rigid.
Yeah, it doesn't stretch that much, right? Yep. So you have like a super non-stretchy line, and then you see people just jigging it, and their jig underneath the water is just and the way that you have to think is like, it's cold. Like the water is super cold. Everything's slowing down. Like minnows are slowing down too. So naturally speaking, perch are used to eating like whatever they're eating, say pinhead minnows for instance. These minnows aren't swimming around like you see them in the summer. They're not just whipping around. Their metabolism is slowed down. And they're just slowly swimming around. And all of a sudden you see your jig or your spoon that's supposed to be imitating one of those minnows, and it's jumping and fluttering around like crazy. Fish, I always say fish are dumb, but they're not stupid, right? They know something's wrong.
it's I liken it to, I am more likely to drive my car up to a window at McDonald's and order food than I am to go start chasing a cow in a field who can, outperform me in speed and agility and try and get a burger that way. Like, no, if it's too much movement, too much effort, it's not worth it. And that's exactly like you said. It's so cold, and unless you're going for lake trout or something where their prime habitat is that cold water,
And
they're going to be very slow. They will have slowed down from what you would expect in the summertime. So that aggressive jigging technique that you've nailed walleye on, you've nailed perch and pike, whatever, bass, you're hitting, all summer long. That is now too fast of a technique to work on those same fish in the cold temperatures.
Yeah. And another thing I've noticed is, like Andrew said, we would be scaring fish away. So if you drop something down quick, you might get the attention of like a bunch of jumbos. Like you'll see them come in and then they look at your lure. And one thing we notice is, say we were fishing slab grabbers, we'd be jigging them around. And I have video like footage of this where I'm jigging a slab grabber, not even a lot, maybe like 3 inches up, then back down, 3 inches up, back down. And they're just staring at it and they won't touch it. And then you just let it hang there and do absolutely nothing. It's just hanging there. And you're like, the fish isn't dumb enough just to come up and eat this piece of metal. And then it just comes up and eats it. Just hanging there every single time. Like, I've had so many people tell me, they're like, just let it hang there and fish will come up and eat it. We've caught perch just on bare jig heads. Just let it sink down the hole and you're not paying attention and a perch grabs it. Sometimes having literally no action is what they want. Now, on the other hand, sometimes, like Andrew said, with lake trout and other fish, having more action is more appropriate to getting bites. And like, it depends on the species of fish. And also it depends on the day. Sometimes the fish are a little more amped up. Sometimes they're a little more sluggish. It depends on a lot of factors. But one time that we really like to have a lot of noise and less subtlety, so to say, when we're perch fishing is when we're calling fish in. And this is one thing that a lot of guys will say when they're perch fishing, and we've been doing this for many years, is if we get to a spot that we know is good. We have a few spots that we fish on a few different lakes, and we know that there's perch there. But we'll drill a hole and we'll look down. This is even before we had a camera. Having a camera is a big benefit because you can look down the hole and be like, okay, there's nothing here. And then, walk a few more feet, drill a hole, look down and be like, oh, here they are, right? But if you don't have a camera and you know it's a good spot, you have to drill a hole. You have to call the fish to you. So one thing you can do is you can either pound the bottom with a bait, like a jigging spoon, or like a jigging wrap, like Drew was saying last week.
Yep.
Or one of my favorites is a lipless crankbait. You get those little like ripping wraps, the little guys.
Yeah.
And you just chuck it down the hole. I like one that's shiny, especially
even
when
like
it's
the
like
Rapal, like the V wrap. Like it's generally bigger, but if you have, again, on the ice on Simcoe, let's say you're allowed 2 rods. So I'll have one that's set up with like a small slab grabber or something, or a small spoon, small jigging wrap. But then if there's nothing in the area, I put on my V wrap, drop it down, and I just let it like hammer into the sediment in the bottom, and it puts this big cloud of stuff up around the bait. And then you start ripping it like hard, just, for a little bit until you start seeing some come in. And then I'll go back to more finesse. Like, you got their attention. They're not going to hit that now, but you need to get their attention so that they become like, hey, what is that over there?
Yeah. One thing I find, especially with perch, which is a very popular species that people like to target, is they're super curious.
Yeah.
Like you'll drop something down and pound the bottom, or you'll have like some kind of, vibrating, rattly bait, and you just start, aggressively jigging it. And we're watching on our camera. And the thing is, I love about a camera is you learn so much.
Yes.
It was worth every penny, in my opinion. You learn so much. But you'll look down the hole and we'll be in like, 15 feet of water. Nothing. You can't see any fish. All of a sudden, Andrew will start jigging. You hear just, the little lipless crankbait, you can hear it up on the surface, right? And you'll look on the camera and all of a sudden you'll just see like a dark shadow come, another one. And all of a sudden a bunch of perch come. Like, they heard that noise. They don't know what it is.
Yep.
And they swam from wherever they were over. And then I find other perch, when they see other perch somewhere, they're like, oh, what are they looking at? And then other perch come. Before you know it, oftentimes you'll have 20, 30 perch there. Now, if you can attract a school of jumbos, that's even better because you're going to catch some jumbos. But even if you can attract some smaller fish, you're getting fish to the area. and you can start catching fish and attracting other ones. But that is one big thing. I feel like a lot of people will get to a hole and be like, you know what? I got this little tungsten with this little tiny, little, maggot on it, and they just start jigging it. And if there's no fish there, perch isn't going to see that 20, 30, 40, 60 feet away.
Mm-hmm.
You have to bring some loud, noisy bait to call them in. And again, like Andrew said, you might not even catch any fish on that lure. One thing I do like is the little rip and wrap, because it's big enough to be noisy, but I've also caught some pretty big jumbos on it too.
Yeah.
And pike. So you'll be jigging, and unfortunately you won't just attract perch. You'll oftentimes attract a pike that just happens to be swimming by. And a pike will just...
The Z-Vibers, they're a nice little small...
Oh yeah,
too.
that's a great
They can make
one.
a lot of noise.
Euro tackle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A bit more expensive on the pricier side, but again, it's they're micro size, but still have a lot of noise. So that's a good option too. You can call them in with it, but also you could also target them with it.
Yeah. And one last point we'll mention about this whole too much or too little action is the rod you choose can make a difference. Now, when it comes to ice fishing, a lot of people, they'll either go extremely bougie or just super basic. And there's no wrong answer. If you're a guy or a girl that likes fishing $200, $300 ice rods, more power to you. That's great. That's your thing. Cool. You don't need that. I've caught more perch on like a $20 ice rod from Canadian Tire than anything,
Yeah.
That being said, I do like slightly nicer rods. Like I like to spend, $60, $70, $100 on a rod now. I'm in my 30s. I don't have kids. I can spend a few bucks on a nice rod, but you don't need that. But the action of the ice rod can make a huge difference, especially if you're jigging. What kind of tip on your ice rod do you like, Andrew?
I do like a very sensitive, soft tip. I prefer it. If I'm going to be jigging for a larger species, I'm using larger baits, then I don't mind a stiffer rod. But if I'm going for like panfish, which I love ice fishing for panfish, then I like to have a very soft tip. Like I like an ultralight ice rod when I'm going there, because as I'm jigging, it's not as an aggressive like motion. Because when you, even on a small tungsten jig, you lift that rod up and the tip bends down, and even if you get the light bite detectors, like the little spring tips and whatnot, that will soften up your rod tip a lot, so that as it moves, it's not as much of like a jerking action as it's going around.
It literally, like, I like a soft tip too when I'm being finessed, because the tip literally you can bounce it.
Yeah.
Instead of jigging the whole rod up, just the tip, you can just bounce it. You can almost feel like the bait moving up and down. So if you find that you're someone that overworks your baits, try to slow down. Like, it's hard. I know. I'm someone that in the summer when I'm bass fishing, I'm a fast reeler. I just like reeling a chatterbait in really fast. It's hard for me to slow down. One thing I do in the summer,
if you have electronics and you see something move in, and you get excited and you're like, I need to get this to
hard.
strike, and you start going.
It's hard.
Yeah.
But you can do things like I said, in the summer, because I'm a fast reeler, one thing that I found that helps me is I use a slower reel. That helps. It's not going to help 100%, but it'll help slow you down a little bit. So one thing is, if you use a slightly softer rod, that can help you not be so aggressive. If you have a super stiff rod and braid, which doesn't, stretch at all, that can really make you overwork your baits in that situation. So
even how you hold your rod sounds a little weird, but I remember growing up, like I would always hold it like a summer, like my regular spinning rod, where I'm just holding the handle, like normal, the reel hanging below. And when I was jigging with that, though, I was more likely to kind of use my wrist, and you lift the rod tip just by pivoting your wrist. And even on a 2-foot rod, that's a lot of movement on that bait. And so now what a lot of guys do is they kind of hold the reel into their fingers over top of the rod. It looks odd, but it can be fairly comfortable. It's easier to grip things sometimes in the winter that way if you're wearing gloves and whatnot. But with that, you can now just move your whole rod. So you're not tipping your rod anymore, because that now kind of feels awkward. So now when you're jigging, you're just lifting that whole rod. So your movement of your hand that you're putting is all the movement that's going to the bait as well. There's no pivoting action that's going to increase that amount of movement down below. So even something small like that could help you to not overwork your bait.
Yeah, for sure. And I know, like, we both started doing that a few years ago, and it does make a big difference. I know a lot of people make fun of you when you do it, if they're not, an avid ice fisherman, but it does literally make a difference. So That is something cool. So I thought we could just go a little bit into the giveaway
Yes.
because this is a really cool giveaway. So Jeff, as we mentioned, Jeff from Limestone Lures, he's been a huge, huge help to the podcast over the years. We really appreciate his support, and he makes awesome baits. You can see my bait wall right here. I have a whole rack here of Limestone Lures over here. Yep. And one of my favorite baits that he makes super good little 3.5 or 4 inch swim baits that we use for almost anything. Trailers
Yeah.
for spinner baits, chatter baits, buzz baits, doesn't matter. Just on a regular jig head. Makes tons of stuff. Lots of bass stuff, walleye stuff, but we're talking ice fishing this week. He has some really cool ice fishing baits. A lot of stuff that it's almost like, I don't mean to sound like you need to buy this stuff, but it's stuff that if you're perch fishing,
Yeah.
like, again, his baits cover a lot of different species of fish, but me and Andrew really love perch fishing ourselves. So some of the baits that he has, I know we're going to use a lot for perch this coming season, hopefully this Saturday. So what are some of the baits that we have? A few of them that we have, so we'll show you some of them. Andrew will show you some of his favorites.
One of my favorite style of baits, he has one, it's called the drip tease. And
Yeah.
it's just got a long like whip tail pretty much. And I love these because they have such, like when I'm not moving my rod at all, and you look at these on a camera, and if you can see down in the water below, or you just put them in your sink so you can see, you'll see that tail just like quivering. It doesn't stop moving. You can't stop it from moving. And so just that little bit of action, I find like triggers a lot of bites. So I love it. It's a nice like long slender tail on these. So I love that.
Yeah. The cool thing too with these is, I know we're talking ice fishing this week, but when I see this, I instantly think crappie.
Yeah.
Like, I know, we're just getting into ice fishing season now, but one thing that me and Andrew just started doing is going spring fishing for crappie. We love it. It's great fun. And this bait right here on a jig head under a float, lights out. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Crappie, any panfish. But another thing also I'll mention about the drip tease, because this is probably my overall favorite bait that Jeff makes at Limestone Lures. If you've ever fished for perch, have you ever heard of using a high hook? Me and Andrew do that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Is you'll have like a spoon or a jig or whatever you have tied to the bottom. And then it depends, 6 inches, 12 inches, 18 inches above your spoon, you just have a single hook. And then you put a bait. You can put a lot of different kinds of baits, but a drip tease is perfect for that. So what happens is the spoon underneath, oftentimes that'll attract the fish. And if they're being finicky, like we said before, you can just drop the spoon to the bottom or lower in the water column. And then this little drip tease will hang there, just like a drop shot. Yeah. And that little tail, like Andrew said, you can't get it to stop moving. The thing's just twitching. And oftentimes the perch will just look up and see that and be like, oh, easy meal. And they'll just go up and eat that. And oftentimes you'll catch more fish on the drop, like on the dropper, on the high hook, than on the actual bait.
Yeah.
So the drip tease is like a perfect size because it's not too small, but it's not too big. So it's perfect. Yep. Definitely check those out.
Another couple, like super finesse. If you're someone who likes using the tungsten jigs and like a small maggot,
that's me.
A couple really cool options. He has the Mighty Mite and the Saucy Tail, and these are like super finesse.
Saucy Tails would be my pick personally.
Yeah,
it's tiny.
It depends how much you want it to look like a critter too.
Yeah,
but the Saucy Tail,
I've blown my nose when I had a cold, and bigger stuff came out than this. It's tiny. Like, how long would you say that is? It's not. It's like half an inch long.
Yeah, like
maybe 3/4 of an inch.
Yeah, like just over. That's because it has small appendages. Like,
yeah,
but the body of the bait is like a half inch at most, and especially the Saucy Tail, it's very, very small. But these are a great option because now, instead of just having like an unmoving maggot that's threaded onto the hook, which again, very successful, you can thread one of these on, and now you still have those like tiny little appendages that are just off to the side, again, moving around in that water. So that's an awesome option if you like really subtle like presentations. That's a really cool thing that he has, and it's tough, I find, to get baits like that small.
Yes,
especially like if you look at them too, like in the package, all of their legs are on. Like I normally get stuff that small, like half of it's missing.
The reason for that is, and here's the thing, a lot of the local bait makers, like we've been a huge supporter. We try our best to buy as much as we can. Like, again, we like some of the bigger brands too, but we try as much as we can to support our local bait makers because they put so much effort and they have so much pride in their work. When you buy, it's happened to me all the time. I'll buy baits from like, some of the bigger companies, and you'll get one of the baits that's like deformed or defected and they just throw it in the pack. They don't care.
Yeah.
They literally don't care. But again, like Andrew said, you look at these baits, you know that Jeff looked at each one of these baits individually and was like, okay, that's good. And he puts it in the package,
Gave it a
puts the
little kiss.
label on.
He's like,
gave a little kiss, like, perfect. And he puts it in the thing and he does a little happy dance because you bought something from him that he put his blood, sweat, and tears into. And every bait is perfect.
Yeah.
They're perfect. And they catch fish. I would say though, okay, I know you mentioned this about the saucy tail.
Mm-hmm.
If you, like Andrew said, if you're an angler that likes using those little tiny tungsten jig heads that are tiny, because sometimes those perch or panfish, whatever you're fishing for, but what I find perch, especially later in the season after they've been pounded by everyone out there,
spooks them.
Yeah, these little guys on little tungsten, absolute dynamite, like killer, super good. Definitely check those out. And you know what, the Mighty Mite. This may be a little bit too much of a giveaway right now, but the Mighty Mite in the spring under a float for steelhead, perfect.
Great nymph, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. And then he has one more bait that's going to be an absolute killer. Few of the bait makers are making these. Jeff does an absolutely fantastic job. We mentioned this before on last year's episode, is the goober goby.
Yeah.
Goby baits have become super popular, obviously because gobies have become like one of the main food sources in a lot of the lakes. But like these baits, they catch everything from, again, generally you're not fishing for bass through the ice because it's usually closed. But in the summer, you're catching bass on goby baits. Like almost every lake in southern Ontario has gobies in them. A lot of them do anyway. But in lakes like Lake Simcoe and other lakes, these goby baits are catching tons of whitefish and lake trout and burbot. Like anything in a lot of these lakes feast on these things.
Oh, yeah.
And the goober goby, it's the perfect size.
Yep.
It's not huge. It's not small. It's perfect. I love it.
When you look at it, like that's the kind of size of a minnow that anyone, even going for perch, like you go get a scoop of minnows, that's like one of the bigger ones in the bag. You're like, oh, excellent.
Catch a jumbo perch on this, no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely check them out. We really appreciate Jeff.
I was going to say another cool thing with these is because they have a very flat bottom and they do have those pectoral fins in the bottom, they can like glide really well. So just like we're used to like a jigging wrap and stuff like that, if you have these on the right hook, on the right jig where it has a good weight distribution, even if you use a weighted hook instead of a jig head and the weight's underneath of it, this actually can like glide down and has more of like a sweeping action similar to what you might expect from like a jigging wrap or something like that. But then it's all a soft bait.
Yeah, definitely killer baits. Again, we'd like to thank Jeff from Limestone Lures. If you would like to support Jeff by buying some of his baits, which I highly recommend because they're good baits, I'd recommend checking out his website. He oftentimes has really good sales too. Mm-hmm. I signed up, when you put an order through and it's like, sign up for our emails. I'm always like, fine. And oftentimes I'll get an email from Jeff and it'll be like, hey, like 50% off. I was like, okay, how can I resist? But anyway, definitely check out his website. We'll put that down below. And if you do buy something from Jeff, we'll have an affiliate link below. We have some affiliate links or some companies that we like to deal with. And we will get a small percentage back, which we will actually put, I didn't even tell Andrew this, but whatever we get back from those affiliate links, we're actually going to put back into for another giveaway for Patreon members. So if you reward us, we will reward you back. Yes. So we get 0 rewards, just the way we like it. But we like to thank Jeff for that because Jeff actually set that up for us too. So definitely check that out. So our next point is, it's kind of like what we were talking about the baits, is size matters. I know like guys hear that a lot, right? Size matters, but sometimes fish are finicky. And like I mentioned before, early ice, it's insane. Like, like the fish are like, hey, I haven't seen a bait in months. And they're just smacking anything, right? You know what I mean?
Yep.
But like after a while, like I'm talking late February, even mid-February, when it kind of gets into that lull, the perch, especially on like the more popular areas or whatever fish you're fishing for, they've seen everything. They've seen it, like, oh, a jigging Rap, I've seen that 50 times on the weekend, or like a slab grabber, I've seen like 1,000 of them if you swam through the perch grounds, right? So what do you do, Andrew, on days like that when you just know the fish have seen everything? What are you going to tie on? We're just going to talk about perch today, just because I'm in a perchy mood.
Yeah. I downsize, because the chances of me finding an ice fishing bait that hasn't been thrown to them is like, oh, I'll try the Meigs jigs. I heard those are good. It's like, guess what? They've seen a million of those. Jig and Rap, like, guess what? They've seen a million of those. But when it gets small, now this might just be the human in me talking, and I know that fish aren't as smart as us sometimes, but like the smaller something is, the less detail you see in it, and the less you might be concerned about it. So with something like this, like when you downsize to like a really like micro jig or something like that, and you drop that down, a person's going to come by, and I won't even move it. Don't like they're so wary of anything. They think anything spooks them, so they come across. I'm like, there's something floating that I could fit in my mouth. I'm like, all right, and they'll just like eat it. But they don't seem to really give too much thought to it when it is such a small morsel.
Yeah. Definitely downsize for me too. One thing, like we mentioned last week in the podcast with DC Hooked Angling, Drew, he's like jigging Raps. Like, I love fishing a jigging Rap for perch. It's one of my favorite baits ever. It's more of an aggressive bait. You can get small ones, but generally speaking, it's not what I'd call a finesse bait.
Mm-hmm.
It's swinging around, you pound it in the bottom. It's got, 3 hooks, right? It's just like, it's a big bait, So when we get to those days when the fish are very finicky, I love just dropping down one of those tiny little tungstens, tiny little tungsten with just a tiny little bait on it. And just like Andrew said, sometimes not even moving it. Sometimes I'll just put my rod down. Like we'll look at the camera and be like, okay, there's some perch down there. Drop the rod down and just put it on the end of the chair and just let it hang there. And you'll see the fish. Like I said, perch are curious. They're dumb. Like, they're pretty dumb. They're not stupid, but they're dumb.
Yep.
And they'll come up and look at it. And like, say, like, for instance, another point we were going to talk about is like scent. Now, that's one of the most like debated things in the fishing industry. I think like people are like, oh, scent doesn't matter and blah, blah, blah. I'm a huge believer that scent does matter. I don't think it matters as much as we all think, but I think it matters enough that we should consider it. We all have scent on our fingers. If you're someone that smokes, you should quit. But if you smoke, you're going to have that smell on your hands. And if you touch a bait and then drop it down the hole, your bait is going to smell unnatural. Mm-hmm. Or maybe you had gas on your hands from your gas auger or something on your hands. It's not going to smell normal. So one thing about scent is, like, especially with Jeff at Limestone Lures, he has like it's a strong fishy scent on his baits. And I feel like if you're just hanging something super small and finessey down and that fish comes up and looks at it, if he's already finicky and it smells weird, he's not going to hit it. If he's finicky and he looks at it, it looks real. It's the size of something that he's normally going to eat and it smells good. Way more likely, in my opinion, that he's going to hit it. So I think scent, like, you can either get, if you're using plastic baits that are scented, you can also get scents that you can add on to bait. Mm-hmm. One of my favorites is smelly jelly. I don't know if you've ever used that, Andrew.
I haven't.
Smelly jelly is a classic. It smells rancid. It's disgusting. But the fish, for some reason, like it. It may just be a confidence boost thing for me. But in my opinion, I've had days when it's been slow and I just put a little bit on the bait and it seems to work. So
I am a firm believer that scent plays a factor. And for me, it depends on the presentation. If, like I said before in the podcast, if it's a fast presentation, no, ice fishing is a slow presentation. But let's say, like, for argument's sake, summertime, you're fishing a chatterbait. I don't think they're going to stop and like follow it for a while and smell it. Like, no, they're in a chase mode. It doesn't matter what it smells like.
It's a reaction.
Action. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you're, anything that is like if you're going carp fishing, or if you're, drop shotting sometime, but if you're fishing like live bait or something, you're fishing a worm under a bobber, that odor is a big thing as to why they hit it. And I know that because if I put on just a crappy rubber bait under a hook and I put a dead worm, so it's not moving either, on a hook, guess what I'm going to get bit on every single time? It's the worm. Why? Because it's not moving. Nothing's changed with it. It could be the exact same color and everything, but there's an odor. So I'm a believer that if it's a slower presentation, scent will play a factor. So when you're ice fishing, you're hanging these things in the water. So if there's like a nice odor that's emanating from that, they're going to be... Why wouldn't you use anything that could be an advantage to you in that circumstance?
Exactly. And scents aren't that expensive. You can get, a little jar of scent for $10. And I've had a thing of smelly jelly for years. Like you're not gobbing it on all your lures. It's just a little bit on. So I don't know. Let us know. Comment on our Instagram if you believe that scent works or not. I think a lot of people don't believe it works, which I find interesting.
Yeah.
But hey, that's just my opinion.
But I'd like to ask people like that how they fish. What presentations are they using where they say that though? Because if I'm putting on a crankbait, I don't care if there's scent or not.
Andrew's like, I'll just snag the fish right in the mouth. It doesn't matter.
I'm just that good.
So the last point we're going to cover today, because we're kind of going a little bit over time, is should you stay at a spot or should you hole hop? Now, I'm a huge hole hopper. I love just drilling, fishing for 5-10 minutes, being like, nope, gone. Like, I think we did a day a few years ago where we drilled 60 holes.
Yeah.
I hate sitting still. Like, I'm the kind of guy where I used to fish with a guy who he would drill a hole and sit there all day. And he'd be totally fine with that. That would be chill. He's like, no, we'll call the fish in. Don't worry about it. If I'm fishing for an hour and I haven't seen a fish, I'm gone. I'm drilling a hole. I'm walking, and not just 10 feet. I'm walking 100 feet, drilling a hole, dropping the camera down, looking around. Unless you have a specific spot, like if you're fishing for lake trout or something like that, when you're fishing for schooling fish like perch, if I can find that school of fish and just drop baits on top of their head, in my opinion, that can be better than sitting in a spot for hours waiting for them to come by. Because sometimes you'll fish and they just won't come by. Just that day, they just won't be in the area and you can't call them in. Mm-hmm. And if you had moved maybe, a quarter of a mile the other way, you would have found them and caught fish. So that's just my thing, is I feel like depending on the species you're fishing for, hole hopping can be huge. I know a lot of guys that fish crappie will drill like 50 holes. Yeah. And they'll just be like, nope, they're not here. They're not here. And they'll just find the fish because the fish are literally just in one spot. They're not roaming around like perch do. So I know Andrew, he goes hole hopping with me. I don't know if he likes it or not. He goes.
I don't mind moving, a few times over the course of the day. But I'm also like fishing for me, and I know it is for Jesse too. Like it's a relaxation, like outlet, right? So when I go fishing, and if I've had, I'm itching to get out. So when I go out this weekend with Jesse, I want to get on fish. I'm going to push hard. But if I'm dead tired, and I'm like, you know what? I just want to go out on the ice and relax. I'll drill like a couple holes, and I'll sit in my hut, nice and toasty warm. I'll cook nice food, and that's what I want to do. I'm not moving. I don't need to. I'm just enjoying my day. So there's pluses and minuses to both. I think that depending, like Jesse said, if we're fishing for perch, we will catch more perch if we're running and gunning. Absolutely. I wouldn't argue that point ever. There are times where the perch, they happen to be under you and they stay under you, and their school's moving around and you get a new one every half hour and you don't have to move anyways. But those days are few and far between, I find. So, it can be more relaxing to stay in one area, but it can be more productive to move around.
Yeah. We have had a few days where we've been in either a hut or we've been, in just drilling holes out, and we've sat on a spot all day and caught fish consistently. And like you said, you'll catch a bunch and then there'll be a slow period. Then another school will come in.
And those are my favorite days because those are literally the best of the both worlds.
Yeah. Especially if you're setting a hut up.
Yeah.
Right. If you're setting a hut up and all the, everything, moving is a pain in the butt.
Yes.
But that being said,
especially if you only have a hand auger. So once we got we just use a drill. But once he got that drill, we started running and gunning a lot more because Jesse's like, we don't have to kill ourselves trying to drill all these holes by
Yeah, I was
hand
like,
all
I
the
can
time.
drill a hole in like 8 seconds. Who cares? I'll drill like 700 of them. You have two big 12 amp DeWalt batteries, you're good. You drill like 300 holes, you're good. So anyway, I really enjoyed this episode. Again, it's ice fishing season. We're really stoked. And I know in Ontario, a lot of people, especially maybe the last week or two, have just been starting to get out. So if you're getting out for the first time, have fun, be safe.
Yep.
You know, there's some tips that we shared today, but definitely check out some videos on YouTube that are much more informative than what we described of how to get out of the water if you do fall in. But have fun. Ice fishing is a great time. Again, we'd highly recommend you listen to last week's episode if you didn't, because Drew, he's a fishing guide. He gave a lot of really beneficial tips, also on safety as well. One thing that we would like to mention too, for the giveaway, is that Jeff from Limestone Lures, definitely, again, check out the link below. There's an affiliate link too if you do buy something. What he is giving away, if you're a Patreon member, you'll be automatically entered, and we will be announcing the winner on Patreon. So download the Patreon app. You can follow along even as a free member. You won't be able to enter as the giveaways, but you can watch for the giveaways too. We'll announce the winner on the giveaway there. The cool thing that Jeff is going to do, he's super flexible. I don't know if he can like do the splits, but like he's flexible in his giveaways. So if you are someone that likes ice fishing, he is offering an ice fishing package where it'll be a bunch of ice fishing baits and he'll ship it right to your door. If you're not someone who ice fishes, he is totally chill with that. He doesn't judge you, probably not. And he will send you baits for other species that you can definitely discuss with him. So you don't have to. I know a lot of people are like, I love these ice fishing episodes, but I don't ice fish.
Yeah,
that's cool. Jeff will definitely handle that. Next week, we have another cool giveaway too, but we'll talk about that next week. So just some last, what do you call it? Housekeeping.
Yep.
Make sure to write us a review. We're trying to get a lot of reviews because I know a lot of you have given us a review, but here's a tip. Say you listen to us on Spotify, go on Apple and give us a review there too. Or vice versa. What happens is when we get more reviews, which are all fantastic. If you have given us a review in the past, really appreciate it. It actually helps us rate better in the podcast charts, which helps us get bigger sponsors, which helps us have bigger giveaways for you guys. So it also helps us keep on going. So we really appreciate if you do that. Our Patreon link as well, if you'd like to support the show, is down in the show notes. So we have, as tradition states, the quote of the week. And to give us that, the man with... I can't even say it anymore. I usually say the man with the mustache, but he has a full beard now. So the man with the beard, Andrew.
Tune in next week. Same average podcast, same average time.
Yeah, that was okay.